let's give the audience a little bit of a background, though, because I don't know that everybody in my audience understands what the Book of Mormon is, and more specifically, how it was produced in 1828 and 1829 in manuscript form.
Well, I think it's, basically you can say it's a religious history of some peoples that came from Jerusalem about 600 BC. They, under the leadership of a man named Lehi, they broke into two opposing groups named after two of the sons. One is called the Nephites, after Nephi, the other the Lamanites, after Laman. And the book basically describes religious aspects of the Nephites, plus the wars that went on between the Lamanites and the Nephites. The Lamanites are cursed with a dark skin because of their evilness, and they ultimately end up conquering and destroying the Nephites at the end of the book, about 400 AD. So we have about 1,000-year history here in the text, and I think it's there is some debate about the general Mormon interpretation that the American Indians, at least some of them, derived from the Lamanites, the darker skinned people. So it's a very interesting history, because Joseph Smith says that he received some gold plates from an angel, and his job was to translate a good portion of these plates. His translation, though, is not like what we would think of as a translation, which would be that you have this text here and you're going to convert it into English, say. Instead, he received, it looks like, a revealed version of the translation, that it isn't actually his translation, that it's coming from the Lord, is the way I would put it. He had a stone which he used, the seer stone, and
I have a picture of that I'm gonna throw that up there, and just for the audience to understand. So, I'm Jewish. I'm not a Mormon, but you are a believing Mormon, and part of what you're presenting here, and in a sense, can I say you wear two hats? Because I said that about myself. I'm a believing Jew, but I also work as a textual scholar from in a sense, a naturalistic perspective when I'm looking at the medieval manuscripts of the Bible. Would you say that's how you approach it as well? That you have your faith aspect?
Yes, this critical text project is not some project of the religion faculty at BYU. In fact, for those 41 years, I was in English and then in linguistics at BYU. So I'm a linguist. I consider the text strictly from a linguistic textual point of view.
Okay.
And
all right.
But I do find evidence of what witnesses said and what's in the original manuscript, that indeed the text was being, in some sense, dictated. It was being given to Joseph Smith, and he was dictating it to his scribes.
Okay. So let me show a picture here of
go
the
ahead.
stone. I'm going to show a picture here of the stone. Okay. So this is the seer stone you're talking about. And,
that's right. That's the one that was used. Now, the thing is, no one, as far as I know, has tried to use it lately.
Okay.
So,
but this isn't just, I mean, so some people, I think, in the audience who are Mormon, and for example, my wife has a work colleague who is very devout Mormon. Her wife, or his wife rather, does work in the temple. I don't know exactly what that means. And I was talking to them about the seer stone, and they're like, oh, that's just what the anti-Mormons say. That's not something Mormons believe. But you're a believing Mormon who taught at BYU, And this photo I just showed of the stone, that comes from the church. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah.
So for the Mormons who aren't in the maybe in the loop, because this is a relatively recent thing the church published, I think 2015. Just talk a minute about the seer stone, and that's something that Mormons acknowledge. Am I right?
Well, no.
No.
A distinct group that believes that Joseph Smith did not use the seer stone.
Okay.
That they believe that there was an apparatus that came with the plates, which was a breastplate and 2 silver bows, and they held two clear kinds of, I guess, glasses like that person could look through. And the idea is that you would look at the plates, and there would be then somehow a translation projected for you. And that's called the Nephite interpreters. You had to use the plates. No one was allowed to see the plates at first. And so it had to be done behind a curtain. And there are a lot of people, this is the traditional view.
Okay.
But no one ever directly saw Joseph Smith doing this because they couldn't see the plates. They weren't allowed to. They would have been behind the curtain. But there is some evidence that in the very beginning, Martin Harris, one of the witnesses, did receive a sheet of paper with the characters on it, translation from around the curtain, and he took it to New York City to have it examined by Professor Anton and others. Well, that's about the only account we actually have, is secondary, of using this instrument. There are, though, 9 people, and Dan Vogel, who you interviewed, I think, 9 people who witnessed that Joseph Smith had the seer stone. He would put it into a hat, put his head up to it to obscure the light, and the descriptions are that he gave was that he saw on parchment the characters he was translating, and underneath the English translation, which he read off. And that's what the 9 can't really testify as to what he saw, but they all say that this is what he did. He had the seer stone, he put it in a hat to obscure the light. He would dictate, the scribe would write it down as they would go along. And so since you have 9 witnesses, 3 of whom were never Mormons.
Really?
3 of them are non-Mormons, and they say this is what he was doing, and it was incredible, but he was doing it. And so I believe he did do it, and it is miraculous. Yeah. But
so the seer stone,
but we don't, but ultimately, I just want to say, ultimately we have to deal with is the manuscript and to the Book of Mormon, and that's where we make our ultimate judgments as to this text, not the accounts of what might have gone on in that early transmission of the text.
So this is what I love about what you do, from what I've read and seen some of your videos, is you talk about, or I guess most of what your research deals with is from what came out of Joseph Smith's mouth to what people wrote down and then was transcribed. And you don't have to be a believing Mormon to deal with that, because, that's a fact that really isn't disputed, that Joseph Smith dictated the Book of Mormon to a series of scribes who then wrote it down, and then a copy of that was made, and then it was printed, right? So that's within the, I guess you could say, the naturalistic realm. What Joseph Smith saw in the hat, that's a matter of faith. What he recited, those are facts. Well, I guess we don't know what he recited. We know what they wrote down from what he recited.
That's correct. Yeah,
okay, that's what I love about this topic. You can be a believer and talk about what he saw. And of course, Dan Vogel would say he was lying and he made the whole thing up, right? I guess I don't want to speak for him, but I think that's what non-Mormons would generally say. And a Mormon believer would say, no, he actually saw something, in a vision. Is that fair to say?
Well, that's what I would say. Now,
Okay,
I'm
beautiful.
telling you, other people are having other viewpoints. There are some
Okay.
Latter Saint scholars that believe that he is getting ideas from this instrument and he is putting it to his own language.
Really?
So, yeah, that is the more prominent viewpoint in Mormon scholarship, is that.
In scholarship. Okay. Is that what they're teaching in Sunday school?
No.
Okay.
They're not. But they're not teaching any of this, really. They just,
really? Okay.
They would just say, we have the Book of Mormon and here it is. You know? And most Latter-day Saints think that the Book of Mormon that's printed right now is what Joseph Smith got. They just don't have any conception of all the.
But there are differences, and we're going to talk about some of those differences. So,
right.
All right. So give us the process here. And what really surprised me when I spoke about this with Dan Vogel, and I think you agree with this, is that the Book of Mormon was dictated by Joseph Smith in a period of something like 80 or 90 days. Is that right?
Well, for the part that he did with Oliver Cowdery beginning in March of 1829, he had done the 116 pages that were lost of the Book of Lehi, plus the beginning first 2 chapters, apparently, of the Book of Mosiah, which we don't have either. People haven't really recognized this. But those were lost, and he had a little bit of Mosiah done in 1828. So the majority of what we have of the text was dictated from March through the end of June of 1829. And it's not disputed, I don't think, by anyone. So if he is creating this text out of his own mind from ideas, it's pretty miraculous. The dictation by the scribes don't have him, and the manuscript doesn't have him making lots of corrections and revising and so forth that you and I might do if we were translating from ideas. So that's one reason why I believe he was actually being given the text and he was reading it off. Now, some people don't like this. They think, oh, that's too easy. But I don't think you have anybody claiming that kind of revelatory nature, even of biblical texts. That maybe there are some, but just the text is being given straight to the prophet to write down.
So what I was taught, I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, and what I was taught is Moses went up to Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, and he came down with a scroll. And that scroll was the Torah. Now, what
about breaking the 10 Commandments?
Well, no. So he also came down with the tablets, but he came down with this scroll. And there's a description that when he wrote about his own death in Deuteronomy 34, he wrote it with tears pouring from his eyes. Now, as an adult, I read that, or even as a teenager, meaning I read the Torah, and I'm like, that's not what it says. It doesn't say that he came down with the scroll. It says he came down, like you said, with the tablets.
That's right.
And you have the phrase that's repeated throughout, particularly Exodus, Leviticus, and and Numbers, rather, which is, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying," and the way medieval Jewish scholars described it was that each one of those sections where it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying," was a separate scroll, and meaning a separate piece of parchment. Or leather, actually, probably not parchment, and that somebody came along, meaning somebody being Moses or Joshua, and sewed them together. And that's why, for example, Numbers 9 takes place before Numbers 1, because they were sewn together maybe thematically rather than chronologically, right? That's like, for example, what Ibn Ezra in the 12th century describes. So you have this sort of fundamentalist view, which is taught to children. And then you have Jewish scholars in the Middle Ages are like, well, we're reading the Torah, and that's not what it claims. You have the secular, modern secular view that says, for example, Reform Judaism says that the Torah was made up of 4 different sources over hundreds of years that they assign letters to, JEPD. What's amazing to me about the Book of Mormon is nobody claims today that it's made up of different sources written over hundreds of years, but it was dictated by Joseph Smith, whether through revelation or through his imagination, depending who you are, over a period of a few months. So that to me is
That's right.
amazing. That's amazing.
That's pretty well, I think, acknowledged. Trying to get a hold of that and what it would mean for a human to do it, or for Joseph Smith to do it, or whatever is a more difficult question. And I think the text is way too complex for it to have been Joseph Smith's mind, particularly when Stan Carmack and I have found all this evidence for the language of the text centering in the 15 and 1600s of English, and not King James English, but just 1600s English. And it's not upstate New York dialect either, so it's a very, a lot of people have lots of opinions over this issue. I'll say that much.
Well, and I think one of the things that, let's say my non-Mormon audience won't be aware of is that the style of the Book of Mormon is not the English of the 19th century of 1829. You have a lot of King Jamesian phrases, and it came to pass and wherefore and things like that.
Yeah,
but you're saying there's parts of it which aren't the dialect of the 19th century and don't come from the King James Bible as well. Is that right?
Yeah, there's phrases, a lot of them have been removed because they didn't make sense. There's one place where "but if" is used, meaning unless. And in 1920, James Talmage replaced "but if" with "unless" because he could tell from the context it means that. But if he had opened up the OED that was in the process of being published, he could find "but if" meaning unless up to the 1600s. And it's sitting there in the original text, and it's sort of just, well, it's sitting there.